So let's formally start. Time is now 9:03 a.m., 9:04. And for a webinar like this, starting exactly on the dot is actually not a big priority. First and foremost, because it will take time for people to get in or log in for whatever technical reasons may have occurred at their end. That being said, we only have until 9:15, and I'm going to go crashingly quickly through a whole ton of material. So that being said, some preliminaries out of the way. This is the litigation in an online era webinar. The point being, I'm going to show you a bit about signing into Zoom and Webex both, because for practical reasons, in a lot of ways, they're the same. And when I say that, I mean that almost literally. Bear in mind, the people who created Zoom did so specifically to compete with Webex and be the friendlier version. But that being said, I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Jim Kawashima. I'm a district judge here, and I've had, by chance and necessity, a lot of experience with online litigation, at least for initial appearances in basic proceedings. Before we get into this too far, I would like to shout out to Michelle Acosta. Thank you so much for setting this up, making the technical part of this stuff happen that even I can't do with all of my powers. And also to Pat and everybody at HSBA for getting this ready. I can't thank you all enough, because the sooner and the broader the information that I'm about to go spitting out in this webinar gets out to as many people as possible, the happier we'll all be here in district court. Now, that being said, as I share screen here, I'm going to be showing you the slides from the actual PDF that was made available to those of you who attend. And if you don't have it yourself or open it yourself, that's fine. It's going to be available. We made it a point to compress it down small so it goes out in email and downloads very quickly. There are only 31 slides. And as I already indicated, I intend to go through them fairly quickly. So effective virtual court appearances. What can I tell you? Number one is how to get in. So I'll start with the Cisco WebEx slides, and the reason I'm doing that is because you're not on WebEx right now. That being said, WebEx is still obviously being used on this island by the family court. It's used on some of the outer islands. Maui is still transitioning between WebEx and Zoom, but that being said, the district court and circuit courts are making a move towards Zoom because, for one reason, it's being adopted more broadly nationwide, but also because, as a practical matter, the feds are using it. So the way we see it, whatever people are more comfortable using will be the thing that gets used. So we're using Zoom for the most part, but as I've said before, and will probably repeat without intending to throughout this seminar, they're not that different. All you really need to know are some of the hotkeys and, more importantly, where the dialogues are. So if you take a look at your screen now, let me take a look at the mouse. You'll actually see when you go to the webex.com, they will make it easy to download the app that runs on your computer, or you can simply check the App Store or Google Play and download it onto your mobile device, whether it's a phone or a tablet. Now, once you've gotten in, all you need is a meeting ID. We're going to make it a point to make all of our meeting IDs consistent, at least in district court and circuit court, and try to keep it down to one meeting ID per room. These are, at a certain point, arbitrary, so we can make sure that they are consistent regardless of where you're signing in from. And hopefully, that will make it easy for everyone to find out where they're supposed to be. That being said, Judge Iha and I have made sure that there's a directory available to almost any judge who's going to be running an online court in district court, so that if you find yourself in the wrong room and you don't know how to find out what the meeting room for the right room is, we should be able to find it for you. Just don't rely on that. Now, once you've entered the meeting ID, that's when you simply click Join Meeting and enter the remote hearing at that point. You will get an option of whether to join with video or without. Typically, you'll want to join with or without. One moment here. Let me stop that screen share for just a second. My apologies. I was trying to demonstrate the without part, but let's get to that. We'll get to that point and the importance of it after I've gotten to the very end of the slides. It is a matter of some consideration, but that being said, It's safer if I just stick to the presentation. By the way, I don't know if the purists among you or the nitpickers among you, or conceivably just me, are the ones who care about this, but you might notice that I'm working through these slides on a PDF, as a PDF, not as a PowerPoint. There's a reason for that. First off, it's easier to navigate. Secondly, what you're seeing me navigate looks more like what you've received. But most importantly, for bandwidth reasons, a PDF is particularly one that we compress down as small as this one is, translates easier through Zoom or any online medium. It's easier to navigate. Again, it's not as pretty. You don't get the transitions that you would get with PowerPoint, or for the Mac users among you with Keynote. It's not a presentation, but it's presentable. And as I will get to a little bit later in this webinar, it's also something people should get used to as a way of trading or presenting exhibits when you're presenting online. So moving on, in Webex, you would click Join Meeting. You'll have the option to choose a computer or phone audio. And in case anyone's curious about that, what that means is you can use your computer's basic audio. And I can speak from experience when I'm saying that all tablets, all phones have software in them to make it possible to, for want of a better term, speak without worrying too much about outside noise. Obviously, if you're standing outdoors and it's windy, that's going to be problematic, but surprisingly not even there as much as you might think. We'll note, though, that we do certain things in the actual district court. For example, we do not use computer audio. One thing I've noticed that some attorneys and some defendants have found more helpful is to log in using the phone. Now, what that means is you would call into a phone number and enter the meeting number when prompted. And when you are, then you're given a participant ID. Now, the meeting number, as I've said, is going to be specific to the courtroom. It will be consistent every time you go to that courtroom. Your participant ID changes every single time you try to log in with a phone. So that's something to keep in mind. The attendee ID right here is something that you'll have to scribble down or keep on your screen as you call in. And by the way, if there's any ambiguity about what I'm talking about, right now, I'm using computer audio. But as I said, in district court, we actually use phone audio because we're connecting to our recording device, the FTR devices, through the intercom system that we use for old style conference calls. And that's true of every courtroom in Hawaii. Every courtroom has either what's called a biamp or jabs that allows us to have phone conferences where it sounds like the person on the phone is everywhere in the room. So along those lines, you can literally use your telephone as the audio. And I do mean that literally. You can hold it up. It doesn't look good, but it sounds good because it's a phone. Ideally, it's better if you have speakerphone capability. Moving on. Now, you would then join the meeting. And as you've noticed here, I can't zoom out without losing a lot of resolution because of the way I compress this PDF, but it's easy to see. The button is actually going to be called Join Meeting. And there is an option in both Zoom and Webex to join the meeting through a web browser without actually downloading either the Webex app or the Zoom app to your computer. So a point of note that's not on this presentation, avoid doing that. Just download the app. What all the app is in either case is a dedicated browser with a lot of convenient buttons. So either way around it, you're going through the net. But the problem is if you aren't using the app, if you are going through your browser, then whatever protocols your browser has is going to slow down both the audio and the video at your end. Now, I can't say this is an absolute definitive fact. I've played with it both ways. I've tested it both ways on a variety of computers. In every instance that I've experienced, and I understand this is just anecdotal, the app has always been faster, smoother, and more reliable. So just go ahead and download it. Now, in this case, note that it says mute your microphone and turn off your video before joining the meeting. Those options will typically appear down at the bottom of the screen. I believe we have the buttons down further below in a later slide. But just remember, for both Webex and Zoom, buttons to mute yourself, to turn off your video, to post Q&As. Oh, and by the way, I've noticed I only got one question so far. So your Q&A button is down at the bottom of your screen in the black menu bar that appears, and you move your mouse down to the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side. And feel free to post questions at any point. They're going to be written. I will not be responding to them in writing. I'll just be answering them as I see them here. So that aside, let me get down to the nitty-gritty of actually participating in district court. Now, I have not seen the attendee list. I'm guessing that a sizable chunk of you have already done this and are perhaps even regulars at this. But since this seminar is being recorded and will be available for future hopeful online litigants, I want to make it clear how we're doing things, because the process set up with cooperation of the deputies prosecutors, the deputy public defenders, and I do mean deputies, by the way. For the most part, these are the line people, the private attorneys who appear heavily in Zoom, the prosecutors in the line who are actually doing Zoom, the public defenders who are actually doing Zoom, and Judge Eha, her volunteers, and our staff in court have come up with basically a way of waiting in the lobby without waiting in the lobby. So what happens is you wait in the lobby until the host admits you. Our policy is to make admission as easy as possible. One of the minor reasons why we use Zoom instead of Webex is because only Zoom allows entry into the waiting room without a password. Every Webex session requires a password. You can't have a meeting without a password. The judiciary as a whole, and CJ Rectenwald in particular, is very particular about wanting to maintain public access to all our proceedings. So that was one consideration. Zoom never requires passwords, and the protocol we've come up doesn't require you waiting in the lobby too long, because what we've done is create a breakout courtroom. And for want of a better term, the breakout courtroom is the actual courtroom, the breakout room, and everyone waiting in the lobby stays there until the greeter or host allows them into the courtroom. So in a sense, what they've done is create a virtual bailiff system. Now, the question has come up whether it's possible to see or hear those in the lobby, or is it possible for people in the lobby to communicate with each other? Easy answer, no. To the second, yes to the first. We can see who comes into the lobby if we're the host. You cannot see each other, you cannot hear each other, and anything you say will not be heard by the host. And that's an important point. You have the power at any point, you as a participant in any online courtroom session, to mute yourself. We do not have the power as hosts in Webex or Zoom to unmute you once you've muted yourself. That's a security/privacy feature that went into effect in August 17th. So there are some litigants and judges who probably don't even realize that that's gone into effect. I guess the theory is they want to encourage participation by not suggesting that we can spy on you whether you want us to or not. So yeah, the short answer to the question that was just posted is, in the lobby, all that happens is the person running the meeting can see that you're waiting, and they make the choice of whether you get to come in. Now, a word on in-meeting controls. As indicated in both Zoom and Webex, they're down at the bottom. They have symbols. If you don't know what the symbols mean, moving your cursor over the symbol will typically tell you that. So you can mute and unmute, turn your video on or off, share screen, chat, and chat functions are typically limited, but you can always chat to the host. And that is, by the way in district court, we have been collecting people's emails. You would get in, send your email as a layperson in particular to the court clerk or to the judge, and that way we can email the disposition slip to you as soon as we have it scanned. Now, these next few slides, I'm going to move through unreasonably quickly. And the reason, of course, is everything that I've just said about Webex applies to Zoom. So these next slides, the only distinction between them and the 10 previous slides is that this is what it looks like on Zoom instead of on Webex. So in Zoom, you would log in, again, either through your browser, which I don't recommend, or in an app, which of course I do recommend, and You get it the same way you would get it, except you go to zoom.us instead of webex.com. Enter the meeting ID and click join. You'll notice the buttons are a bit more rounded, and the blue color is very distinctive to Zoom. They haven't gone as far as trademarking it like Tiffany's done with Canary Blue, but they're very dedicated to keeping their entire user experience looking consistent and as simple as possible, which is something I have to admit I appreciate slightly more about Zoom than I do about Webex. Now, you launch and open, same as you would with Webex, enter your name. And I didn't mention this before, but this is something you can do whether you're logging in as a guest or with your own account in both Webex and Zoom. It's very helpful to us in the district court if you do that. But that being said, for the most part, our heaviest calendars will have a virtual bailiff who's going to gather everyone's names and rename you as you go through. So entering your name is helpful, but not critical. Same as before, you would choose your audio connection. Let me make a short point about this. The numbers for Zoom have given people some confusion because they keep reordering. They're just a bunch of numbers. There are toll-free numbers available right now. We're trying to keep that available, particularly for people who are phoning in on landlines. As of now, you can still do so, and our court notices will still have toll-free numbers available for you to join the Zoom meetings with. You would have as meeting IDs, same as with WebEx, and a unique participant ID, unique to you and unique to the session. And then you'll, again, be waiting to enter the virtual courtroom. The in-meeting controls are just like WebEx at the bottom of the screen. In Zoom's case, I believe they're labeled better, but regardless, if you move your mouse over them, or your cursor over them, I should say, the labels will appear. So one way or another, just keep in mind everything about both Zoom and WebEx's conference, well, I forget the exact term for it, but both Zoom and WebEx have tried their best to make the user experience as user-friendly as possible. You will have the opportunity to adjust view settings, which I've occasionally found useful. I should give a word of warning to those of you who appear in my courtrooms, by the way. I always keep my own monitor on gallery view so I can keep track of as many people as possible. The only time I switch away is if someone holds something up to the camera that I need to see, or the prosecutor does, and during one-on-one colloquies when I have to confirm that somebody is interacting with me face-to-face. So yeah, some of us are sneaky that way. That being said, be aware that the additional resources here just as a side note, we sent you a PDF. I realize that some people find it easier to print it out, which is why we did it on white paper to make it easier to print out. But as long as you have the PDF, Michelle made sure that all of these links are still active. We click on any of them, they'll take you to where you need to go. But one point I want to make right now at about the halfway or just before the halfway mark, or I should say 30% mark, regardless. User friendliness for Zoom and WebEx doesn't just apply to the companies, Zoom and WebEx. So many people are using this technology worldwide that just about any question you might have about the use of these systems online. How do you share screens? What happens if two people try to log on to the same license or account? Can meeting numbers be changed? Any questions like that? I have not yet found a question that I've had regarding Zoom or WebEx use that isn't answered online, both in text and with instructional videos. A lot of people are using this technology, and as a result, there's a lot of free resources available from people who actually use this technology. So if you leave this webinar with no other impression than that, it's that it's easy to find the answers you're looking for through Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo. All you need to do is search for it. And every question I've ever had has been fairly easy to answer because, again, there are so many people using this for any number of purposes, including and especially for online litigation. Now, that being said, the judiciary website itself does have links designed to be quick to give you access to the meeting rooms, lists of meeting rooms, and links wherever we found helpful. We're making special efforts, in fact, to make this technology accessible to people who go directly to our website as well. Now, because the fonts are not going to be as pretty as they will be if you go through Google. I did get a question, where did HSBA send the slides? If we haven't gotten them all out, my apologies. Michelle assembled them, and me being me, I messed with them a bit and added stuff and edited things. So the final version of it wasn't actually put out till I think a couple of days ago. At the very least, wherever this webinar is downloadable, those slides will also be downloadable. Beyond that, Michelle, do you know anything else about how these things were sent out or how they're sent out? My understanding is there's typically a link where you look up any HSBA online webinar that also allows you to download the PDF.
Hi, Judge. This is Michelle. This webinar is being recorded and it will be made available through the HSBA website. So that will contain the materials for the website, or I'm sorry, the webinar as well.
Excellent. And like I said, we made it an effort to make them small, easy to print, and easy to download. The slides, not the actual video, that you're just going to have to suffer through. There's also a question about whether we have the option to view the gallery during this presentation, and the answer is no. Oh, and by the way, if you're curious, I'm not viewing the gallery. So if you are, at your camera sleeping or something, I can't see that. Michelle might be able to, but she'll be nice about it. So yeah, you don't have the option. But during actual online courtroom sessions or Zoom meetings or Webex meetings, if you are a participant, because remember, this is a webinar where there's just me talking at you. If you're a participant in the meeting, the gallery view is available to all the participants there. I have not yet found a setting that changes that. And something that I have found that can be valuable and not a lot of users know, if you are using Zoom on your phone, I believe both the iPhone and Galaxy, Zoom and Webex, your biggest friend is the sweep across. Because if you want to switch from gallery view to portrait view to the screen share view, all you do is sweep across the whole screen. I believe both apps on both platforms operate in that fashion. There's also been a question, how do we know which hearings require Zoom instead of a personal appearance, which have the option of Zoom, and with the electronic service have a meeting number and login information? The short answer to that is, if you get a notice that has Zoom information on it, that's something where Zoom is available. The longer answer is, right now we're not doing personal appearances, though we're getting back into it now that the lockdown is done. And our long-term commitment, not only here in district, but throughout the circuit, and indeed throughout the state, is to have both versions available. I honestly don't know at this point how practical that's been. We have done a mix of both. I have personally done a mix of both. Live appearances, Zoom appearances, and Webex appearances all at the same time in courtroom 7C arraignments. So that's really going to fall up to the individual judge's discretion as to how that's done. I will say that safety is a big concern of ours, so it is our goal to get physical bodies in and out of the courtroom, because we know that if you're in your office on Zoom, as annoying as it may be to wait, you're at least in a safe space, and I hope a comfortable one. So our long-term commitment is to both. And I know that on neighbor islands, for example, Judge Acobo will typically sign in to Zoom in the morning, and they'll just leave it running the entire day. Whether their JAB system is actually recording or not, the Zoom meeting is constantly running. So people are signing in and walking in throughout the day. But that's a great question. I'm glad somebody asked that, because it is important for me to emphasize, because it's not in our slides, the judge's commitment, and indeed the entire judiciary's commitment going forward to adopting and maintaining online communication and online sessions, essentially for the entire foreseeable future. Obviously, whenever possible, we're going to entertain live, and for reasons I will get to a little bit later, I understand that that's going to be preferable for the majority of people. But we have had so much positive feedback. And by we, I mean not just the state of Hawaii, but states nationwide, particularly Texas and New Jersey, where I think they both use Zoom heavily. They've noticed things that they haven't noticed before, litigants who don't have to leave their workspace or don't have to find sitters to make appearances for traffic infractions on their own behalf, people who can still wait in their offices for their appearance and still get work done on the side. Because there's no rule against that, by the way, and I see a lot of the attorneys do that, and I'm happy with that because it means we're not wasting your time. And I've never had a problem where, you know, someone's so engrossed in whatever he's doing elsewhere, he doesn't notice when his name is called. And when I say that, I mean only lawyers, because that's very frequently the case with pro se litigants, the results of which are, quite frankly, a lot more funny than they ever are annoying. Before I go on, I've got a few other questions. Oh, some people are saying they haven't got the handouts yet. Don't worry too much about that. You're going to be able to. The handouts you should consider as just a PowerPoint. I'm using them as a PDF for a very specific reason I'll get into later. But let me just say what it is in case I forget. I believe I said it earlier anyhow. I'm using PDFs to present them because it's a smaller program that runs smoother. Whereas PowerPoint and Keynote, because of their ActiveX components and the multimedia that they incorporate, tend to be jerkier and can slow down as they go online. So I'm using what looks like a handout because it is a handout. I don't want anyone to panic if they don't have the handout right now, because number one, it's going to be available. And number two, what you're seeing me sharing on the screen right now is essentially a PowerPoint, or I should say a PDF that I'm handling, PowerPoint. I have gotten a question already. Let's see. Oh, I think I answered this question. Whether there's a place to check whether an individual hearing is live only or web only or a mix. Right up until now, they're web only for safety reasons. But again, our goal is a mix. Was that here? No, that's not here. I'm sorry, Ms. Lundquist. That's not on slide 20 per se. Now, how to handle exhibits. Are we going to get to that yet? We are going to get to it. I don't know that it's on a slide. The questions come up. Just be available. Also, questions come up about trials, both jury and non-jury available in Hawaii. Short answer is we're about to start a first bench trial on our outer islands to see how that works. There have been jury trials conducted, one in California, civil, and one in Texas, criminal. Whether the effects of that were good or not depends on which side you ask. But for the most part, all the litigants and parties reported an overall positive experience. But let me get to that a little bit further on. I will admit that, that there's no slides addressing this because this is, when I talk about trials, something that's in such an incipient phase, it wasn't worth generating slides and the attendant panic over. So let me get to that a little bit further down. Also had a very practical question from someone who lost connection. And if this happens during a session, what happens? The answer to the question is you just log back in. Actually, the preamble to the answer to that question, what happens if you're in the middle of a hearing and you lose connection, is don't panic. You've already got the meeting number. If you're using the app, the last meeting number that you logged in to, both in Webex and Zoom, is saved in the join meeting dialog box. In other words, if you click on the corner of it, you'll see a little arrow and a drop down of your recent meetings. And of course, the most recent one is the one you just got kicked out of. So all you have to do is rejoin. And let me say, first and foremost, that we are all extremely patient with people about that. I was going to save this for later, but let me say it now, just because it bears repetition when I do say it later. We are all, and when I say all, the judges, the staff, and I hope the litigants and the attorneys as well are very patient with drop-offs because they happen. I don't know that anyone, loses their mind anymore if you get a dropped call, no matter how important it is, you're on your cell phone, you mistakenly walk into an elevator and lose the call, nobody freaks out. This technology should be thought of that way. Everything about both Zoom and Webex is designed from their side to make it easier for you to log back in if you happen to be kicked out. So again, preamble, don't panic. Number two, just log back in. Nobody should be annoyed with you, especially not those of us wearing the black robes. Now, I want to get on with the presentation, but Susan Yozis asked me a question that I can't resist answering. Whether there have been problems with members of the gallery attempting to disrupt proceedings and how you deal with this. No, why would anyone do that? I mean, this is Hawaii, the Aloha State. So yeah, district court is still district court, and arraignments are still arraignments. So, you know, I have personally experienced this. I have a lawsuit against me that was dismissed before any motions or even an answer got filed in federal court by someone who was mad at me for throwing him out of the courtroom because he wasn't a litigant and he was being disruptive. It happens live. So of course it's going to happen online too, and it has. You know, we have people cut in, and as I mentioned before, you, the participant, have the power to unmute yourself. So if someone's being particularly disruptive, I might, as the host, mute him or her so that we don't have to listen to them, you know, yelling or talking, doing whatever they're doing. And immediately they unmute themselves and literally come back in. At that point, it's possible to simply kick them out. And by the way, if that happens, that person can't sign back in under that ID. They have to log in under a different Zoom ID or Webex ID. And they can. We have never had anyone go quite that far once they've been kicked out. And I can say off the top of my head, actual kicks out have happened maybe 5 or 6 times total. And that's for all of us, all judges doing Zoom. However, disruptive litigants in the gallery, that happens every time. And let me make this clear. Disruptive on purpose for me, and I've handled at this point about 1,000 different litigants. That's not 1,000 different cases, 1,000 different individuals online over the past months. Only one person I've come across has been purposely disruptive. The disruptions occur from background noises, people being, okay, I'm gonna just say it, in their cars while the engine's running suspiciously enough, or, you know, the dog's barking or someone's watching TV in the background, and we'll simply mute them. So is that a problem? Yes, it's not a serious problem. And again, as I mentioned, the important thing is that the user is not locked out if they are unfairly muted. You as a participant, the litigant, the party, always have the power to unmute yourself. So sorry for getting off track, but that question is just too tempting for me to not answer it. Now, let's see. Oh, I don't know if this is a question from Anderson Meyer, whether it's easy to share screen to show an exhibit in a deposition, etc. The answer is yes, because I'm doing it right now. And this isn't some like humble brag about, yeah, I can do it. It's easy to do because the buttons to share screen are at the bottom of your screen. In other words, right down at the bottom, you're gonna see the share screen. Now, because this is a webinar and I'm the presenter, if not the host, Michelle's the host, my share screen is bright green. That's not always the case, but it's always there as long as the option is given to share screen. I will say this, because this is not addressed anywhere on our slides. If you want to do a deposition, then obviously no one that you gesture is going to be a host. And if you want to do a deposition, then you need a paid license to Zoom or Webex, because to host for any more than an allotted amount of time with the ability to share screens, mute, unmute, and rename, that requires a paid membership. And so that is a consideration. If you want to do this, if everyone agrees to do this via Zoom, then someone, the host, is going to need a paid membership. I have not checked on this, so I really have no idea whether this is true or not. But I would guess, in fact, I'd be very surprised if this were not the case, that a lot of, what I'm saying is it's possible that Ralph Rosenberg and company are already getting their own licenses because it behooves the actual transcribers to have the power to host. But that's a guess. I haven't asked them, and the idea only just occurred to me this very second. So moving on, the judiciary website, I'm going to get through a few best practices and things we've learned along the way. But before we do, I noticed that the Q&A is backed up a bit. Just give me a few seconds to see if there's anything here. So the court's allowing members of the public to phone in and listen since they cannot appear in person. There's been no guidance on this issue in the orders. So here's the question, the meat of it. Are they supposed to call the court to get permission to join? Make this clear. No one needs to get permission to join any of the district court or circuit courts meetings unless they're closed. Our commitment is to make the sessions open. One of the reasons that we're doing this through Zoom is for ADA reasons. Initially, and this is what they're doing in Texas, we looked at actually streaming online through YouTube all of our court sessions. So anyone could watch it just by clicking into YouTube. But we learned for ADA considerations, we need to pay for closed captioning, live closed captioning to do that. So if we allow anyone, even a non-litigant, even just someone who wants to walk in off the street to participate or at least observe, they have that ability. And if they require an interpreter, we can provide that, same as we do for our actual litigants. The important thing to note is we are committed to making access to our virtual courtrooms as open as access to our regular courtrooms, unless we're under lockdown. Question is, can a prosecutor share a screen containing a filed written complaint to avoid having to read it during the process? That's a very interesting question. The short answer is the judge has to allow it, number one. And of course, it'll depend on the situation. So the short answer is that, yeah, it's going to be up to the judge. As a practical matter, I don't think it'll be very effective because we would have to wait for whoever's reading it to figure out how to expand it and then go through every line. So let's deal with that ad hoc. Screen share in Webex. I'm sorry, Michelle, this I'll have to admit I don't know. I have not played with Webex enough to know how screen sharing works from a mechanistic standpoint. I simply know that it exists and it's critical not only to litigation, but to everyone they expect to be in their customer base. They expect everyone to want to share their PowerPoints and their graphs and their growth charts and their profit charts, any kind of exhibits. So sharing a screen is something that's available in both Webex and Zoom and specifically designed to be easy to use in both Webex and Zoom. Now, a word about best practices. You're going to obviously want to test your equipment, internet web conference connections in advance. There's a link here, and it is with the others active, Test My Net, that allows you to test your connections. To be frank, the easiest way and the way that I always use, I have a Zoom app on my phone, so I'll log in as a host and log in as a participant. If any of you happen to be in my courtrooms and you see me in two different places at the same time, that's the reason why. Any unused devices should be connected from Wi-Fi to free up bandwidth. Don't let the kids watch Netflix or anything that's streaming video because those are data hogs. Something that's especially helpful for screen sharing is to close all applications and browser windows. At any given moment, when I'm screen sharing, I want to switch between this and other screens. I can do it because I purposely shut down everything that I don't wish to share with you. It's not because I'm selfish or I think there's something embarrassing on them, but it just makes it that much easier for me to go among things. Now, audio. Using earphones or earbuds to connect to the proceedings more clearly. My apologies, I should have had this out earlier, but I do see a lot of attorneys using iPods, earbuds. I believe that's what they're called, earpods, and then AirPods. I've seen the Bose things in people's ears. In short, Bluetooth headsets work great as long as you don't mind having little white things sticking out of your ears. I can tell you it doesn't offend me since I go around most of the day with those things on. But they work great. The only thing you have to keep in mind is they aren't designed for 3-hour court proceedings. They're designed for 1 or 2 hours of conversation. So while the sound is excellent out of Bluetooth headsets connected to your laptop or your phone, the battery life is something to watch out for. Now, backup communication plan, yeah, create one. But the short answer to that is there already is one in place. If you are in Zoom on an app, then unless your computer doesn't have a microphone, that is your backup. It's a default as well as a backup. And along those lines, let me just say that, yeah, not every computer has a microphone. Here at the judiciary, our PCs don't have microphones or speakers. So if you're going to be working on a desktop computer, check to make sure that you haven't gone economical the way we have and denied yourself the ability to have speakers and microphones. For a little while, we were kind of scared because webcams at the beginning of this outbreak and at the dawn of the Zoom litigation age were extremely hard to find in person on the island or even online. The shortage is over, along with the shortage of toilet paper in Costco. You can get webcams, speakers, and mics very easily if your computer is not so equipped. Now, things to keep in mind. This slide here covers it. Your screen will identify you. Make sure that the personal identifier shows you and not someone in your office or household. I'll be honest, that happens a lot because people are using their friend's phone or their family member's phone. At this point, we as judges in the district court of the First Circuit don't particularly care anymore because we have hosts to take care of the renaming process for us. But if you do have a mobile device, you're going to want to keep it on a solid surface with the camera at eye level where mine is right now, or slightly above eye level, just as a presentational consideration, not too much higher. And that's not for any practical or legal reasons. It's just because it makes you look like this, which I'm told by media people makes you look weak. And of course, if the camera's too low, I know from experience that makes you look fat. Be mindful of what's behind you. Keep a neutral wall if in the background if possible. Like this one isn't, but I just think it looks cool, as long as you can't see how unimpressive those framed things actually are. So keep that in mind. Please do make sure there's good lighting, best to position a lamp or sit facing a window so the light's coming in your direction, but not directly on your face. And certain things are going to be unavoidable. I have blinds right here, so if I lean too far forward, you'll see the lights from them. It also depends on the kind of day. I don't think that's something to worry about too much. Keep the device on mute when not speaking. As I said, this reduces feedback and background noise. Not a huge consideration right now because at this point, between the judges, the prosecutors, the public defenders, the virtual bailiffs, and the clerks, we've gotten pretty good at just muting people whose background noise are inadvertently disrupting the proceedings. And again, I want to emphasize, disruptions occur in every single court session that we do on Zoom, but they're very, very rarely deliberate. So we're not going to hold that against anybody just because you've got too much noise in the background. Please do not. Oh, and yeah, thanks Pam for sharing. Zoom membership's $140 a year. I would say that it's a bargain, except that, you know, right now I'm paying for Disney Plus, so I got to save on the pennies. But that said, all the courtrooms are going to have dedicated Zoom licenses, one for each courtroom. Someone did check. Rosenberg does have Zoom accounts and host depositions. Excellent. So I'm absolutely certain that they're going to make sure to enable sharing of documents and screens. Now, obviously, don't participate operating a motor vehicle. None of us like this. It's a particular bugaboo of Judge Lendy Oheim, but I think that goes without saying. This first point on please do not, though, please do not talk over others. This is something that's unique to Zoom. because of the nature of the system, our brains are wired to listen to only what we want to. Our ears can hear one conversation out of a room. That's an evolutionary trait that gets canceled out by Zoom because everyone is the same volume. And it's literally impossible for us to distinguish among people just using our ears. It's an evolutionary trait that gets completely wiped out by online litigation. So avoid talking over others. I mean, unless you think it's absolutely necessary. And if you do, you know, it better be very urgent. You can also get our attention by holding up your hand. There's a button in both Zoom and Webex to literally let the person know you're holding up your hand. And you can physically hold up your hand and wave. People get our attention that way all the time. And as low tech and kind of almost comical as it is, it's effective. And as I've said, we are open to those sorts of practicalities. Now, let's see. Getting to the actual screen share button, this is the button that I'm using. And I think from the screenshot that I found online, I guess it's always green. If not, it's certainly going to be green when you go to it. When you screen share, this next page shows you what you're going to see. You can pick what to share. So it's not literally a screenshot of your computer's desktop. It's what you want to show in what window you want to show. Throughout this entire webinar, for the most part, I've been sharing a PDF. Now, I should say that I've been sharing a PDF that I'm looking at on a, what do you call it? Portrait mode? Yeah, portrait mode screen. In other words, I can drag it out like that, but that just makes it harder for all of you to see. So that's the reason why I'm keeping it in this shape. But the screen will change shape to whatever your shape is. I'm not sure I did that long enough for all of you to see it, but again, it's not important. What is important is that you have the option to show what you want. Screen sharing is selective, and you're the one making the selections. Note, by the way, there's also a whiteboard, and you can literally draw things on that if need be. There's an option to use your iPhone or iPad as an additional camera or as an additional screen. The Webex screen share button is not as pretty, and it's on the left-hand side, but it's still there, and the functions are the same. You will get to choose what specific window you're sharing. And it didn't occur to me to just this instant that that's what's actually what we're talking about. What's in the window, not your screen. You're sharing windows, not screens. Now, a bit about shortcuts. These last two I've got for audio on and audio off, video on and video off for Webex and Zoom in both Mac and PC. Incidentally, there are ways to get in and out of screen sharing that are easier than some and harder than others. What I did, for example, just now, instead of bothering with actual screen sharing and getting it allowed and ending it, I just quit the program that was showing that PDF and it went away. The reason I made those last two slides so prominent is because I find them very practical for a number of reasons. If I have to, excuse me, if I really cough loudly, it's easy for me to shut the audio down simply, with a keystroke instead of having to actually move the mouse around and find it. So it's useful to have those keys available. I mean, if I have to cough so much that it's going to be embarrassing, much better. Again, it's useful to have those available if there's a loud noise behind you. I can tell you there's at least one viral video where I'm sure, at least one guy had wanted the power to control his screen that would not have been afforded him under the technology at the time. I don't know if you've seen this. Probably you all have. I'm going to show it anyway.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. North Korea.
Now, that was obviously a live broadcast, so it wouldn't have done to cut off his own audio or video. But I can tell you from anecdotal experience, having the ability to shut off your audio or video very quickly when you need to is a practical one, both at my end and at the litigant's end. Now, let's see. A couple other questions. Let me get to those. Before I do, and they're important, we do have about 20 minutes left. So there are a couple of practical things I'd like to get to. Questions were asked about exhibits, how to handle exhibits. I'm hoping that the relative smoothness that this particular webinar has gone through, for want of a better term, that's an indicator of how much better presenting and controlling exhibits through PDFs is than just about anything else. If you got a bunch of exhibits in one PDF or in a number of PDFs, PDFs are specifically designed for portability and cross-platform viewability. The whole notion is what you see is what you get, whether you're looking at it on a PC, a mobile device, or an iMac, or I can't think of what else off the top of my head. Oh yeah, a Macintosh. Whatever you're looking at it on, it's supposed to look the same. And for that reason, I'm a huge fan of PDFs, which is why I made it a point to make it clear to everyone here that what would normally be presented as a slideshow during this presentation, I did using the PDF. I was able to navigate more quickly through them, find the things I needed more quickly. And if it comes to it, if that instead of, and I suppose in a way it was, that PDF was a set of exhibits, exhibits that if you participants or viewers don't have right now, you'll be able to get and download. So the best way, in my view, to share exhibits, first through discovery, is through e-discovery and through PDFs. I'm certain that the many criminal defense attorneys and prosecutors already in this meeting can attest to that personally. Now, as far as showing them on screen, throughout this presentation, I've been demonstrating screen sharing. Oh, and incidentally, I forgot to mention as well I was doing that BBC clip. If it was jerky at your end, then that means you probably are not on a machine that would be conducive to showing multimedia while sharing screens. If you saw it smoothly, then your machine, whether it's a mobile device or a computer, could probably safely share multimedia, movies, or audio. But if it was jerky, then even more so, your method of choice for screen sharing should be to reduce whatever you want to show to a PDF and then share that. So again, I'm beating that dead horse. Just remember, PDFs are better than PowerPoints in my personal view. As far as just showing things, worst case scenario, we see this a lot in district court. Someone shows their insurance card to the prosecutor, but when they do, they're moving around. So, if they ask them, can you see that? The answer is going to be no. And then they try to steady it with two hands, and the answer is, they still can't see it. So what I found is if you grip your wrist and steady it that way, the view is much better. It does take autofocus about 2 seconds to actually focus in on whatever you're looking at. But that's all I can say about that. Planted elbows, grab your wrist, and the whole thing looks that much more clear. And by the way, if you're wondering, yes, the card changed. Now, a bit about presentation before I get to a lot of these very interesting questions that have been posed. I've been looking into this for a while because I used to make instructional videos. Throughout this presentation, since I'm the presenter, I'm looking right at my webcam lens and trying to avoid looking around. In an actual phone conference or a presentation, you don't want to do that because you don't actually want to look like a newscaster because you aren't one, and it can get creepy. I have found a very interesting technique, which is If any one of you are so socially inept, like I've been, that you have to be taught how to talk to people and seem normal, you'll focus on one eye and back and forth, so it doesn't look like you're staring through their brain. On a webcam, you'll look at the camera and then down a bit and then down a bit and then back up. This triangle approach that I've been using, so you can decide whether it's effective, is something that I've seen multiple people present as the best way to teleconference, short of the technology, which does exist, by the way, that allows you to see the face of the person you're looking at superimposed over your webcam. I think that's a little excessive, but it's out there. A voice volume, it's that's going to come up if you can't be heard. Typically, you just get closer to your camera. As I've already mentioned, people using headsets typically have an easier time of it. However, I've noticed this repeatedly. The wired Apple headsets, the speaker, the little control button has to be within about a baseball's distance of your mouth for you to be audible. Just a problem with where the mic is dangling. If you're curious what I'm using right now, I'm using what's called, well, I can't show it without damaging it because I just disconnected it while I'm doing it. But I'm using a podcast quality microphone. It's supposed to be studio quality. There is a pop filter on it to make sure that my S's and P's, don't damage your eardrums. But these are just, petty, shallow things. But they do figure into presentation. They help with communication. Now, before I get to the questions, and there are a bunch of really interesting ones here, let me just say a word about trials, because when we first conceived of this webinar, we were going to get to online trials, and we're getting there. But I don't want anyone to panic. We're not talking about abrogating the rules of civil or penal procedure yet. Just understand the reality that there have been jury trials conducted on Zoom in Texas and California. That having been said, there is not a big push anywhere in the world, as far as I'm concerned or aware, to force this practice onto the barrister community. Even the great state of Texas, the vanguard of Zoom-based court appearances, 57% of trial lawyers would rather not conduct remote trials. But what I think is interesting is that's a majority, but it's kind of a narrow majority. And there are advantages to those who are willing to take the leap. You have more control over your presentation space. There's travel time. There's any number of physical conveniences available to you when you do things remotely, as opposed to actually having to come to court and sit there and wait for us to come in. So that being said, let me get to some of the questions. Now, excellent question from Judge Mitsuyama. What if the exhibits are in documents or video auto recording? As I'd mentioned, in those cases, my advice is share them beforehand and reference them so that they can be played independently at the far end of the presentation. Remember what I just said about that BBC video. If it was jerky to you, then video recordings and presentations are not going to work as shared screens across Zoom or Webex on your computer. And that's at your end. Obviously, you have no way of knowing without asking whether it's jerky at the other end. Also, a great question. I should have thought of this myself. Thank you, Mr. Halstead. Can an attorney consult their client privately? Yes, we have breakout rooms where once the host sends you and your client into this room, and all they do is, you appear on another black screen, just like I am now, your client's next to you. Not only is that breakout room specific to the two of you, both WebEx and Zoom have protocols in place to keep anyone else from listening in or recording unless you allow it. So they are literally attorney-client privileged confessional booths, airtight and sound tight and video tight. How do we get physical copies to the district court for a hearing when you're not allowed to come in person? That I think would just have to depend on and that would be a family court issue more than I think district court. For the most part, they just have to be sent in and referenced and labeled, so it's easy to talk about which specific exhibit you're referring to. Now, Pam points out good headphones have a mute button to quickly mute yourself. Yeah, no way around that. That's an absolute fact. My preferred headphones of choice are the Bose QCs because they look weird on your head, but the audio is awesome, and so is the speaker. Also, the talk time on them, as far as I can tell, is huge. I've run them on audio for over 20 hours straight without them dying. So that means the audio is probably at least 5 hours. But they are a bit unwieldy. Questions being asked, is Webex capable? Will it be up to the individual judge whether screen sharing is permitted to show? Yes, the host has the power to allow or disallow screen sharing, and only the host. Now, as a practical matter, when the judge starts the meeting, that host responsibility is passed off to the virtual bailiff, but the screen sharing is set up by the judge beforehand. As for things like terms and conditions of probation and supervision, those kinds of things have so much fine print on them that right now our current practice, as of yesterday, literally yesterday, is that if someone wants a deferral, I will, as a judge, go over the terms orally on camera, but then the actual old style carbon copy deferral forms will still have to be filled out and filed with court with the judge's signature within about 2 or 3 weeks after that. Right now we're stating status dates 2 or 3 weeks down the road just to get the hard copies in. So that's the practice right now. Question about co-petitioners appearing remotely. Does the court require or prefer them to appear on separate devices? That's a practical question that's really up to the co-petitioners. We often have two people sitting together side by side. On one occasion, I had one defendant who was on his phone and then another defendant who was asleep. And it was interesting because I didn't realize they were roommates until I finally asked, hey, wait, who's controlling the phone? Because this particular guy was savvy enough to name himself and then rename himself to his friend's name. So he tried to get his friend who was sleeping to participate in the 7C arraignment. It was a valiant effort, but yes. So the short answer is, do you want to both appear together or on separate devices? As far as I can tell, these Zoom and Webex accounts, particularly the paid ones that we have here in district, are designed to handle hundreds of participants at once, just like we're handling hundreds of attendees right now. I have seen the maximum I dealt with live online at the same time in the courtroom without any drop-offs is 94. And I think Judge Iha and Judge Lendio can boast bigger numbers than that. So it's not a practical matter. It's not a technical matter. If it's just easy for the two of you to sit next to each other, that's fine. Almost any computer mic or mobile phone mic will pick up either of your voices. That's not a big technical concern. Now, let's see if there's anything else I've missed. I think I've hit everything that's not repeated. Oh, thanks, Pam. Yeah, she's actually explained. Pam Lundquist says that we've actually dropped off. She's actually dropped off hard copy 1 week ahead of the hearing. She's not sure if that's still the requirements. I don't know. This is an interesting question from Mr. Chow. Thank you. How does the court handle sidebar discussions? We haven't had them yet, but if we do, they'll be very easy to handle because all that needs to be done is for the judge to have a breakout room ready. And if it was me, I would just name the breakout room sidebar and automatically pre-program it to accept the lawyers and the reporters, participants, and ban the witnesses and jurors and parties. That's an easy setup. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. When I run courtroom 7A, I just go ahead before anyone logs in. and create a breakout room called attorney/client. And as the public defender and private attorneys come in, I put them all in as listees. So it's easy for me to add them in with a client and they come in and come out. So the short answer to your question, Mr. Chow, sidebar discussions, I haven't had to handle them. As far as I know, no one has, but they will be very easy to handle with the breakout room protocol. It's been enormously successful and handling fairly large calendars with a large number of participants. The only question is just going to be, at what point is that going to be necessary? It hasn't yet, and it may never be. But as I've said, online trials, they're gaining traction. In a state as conservative as Texas, and that's not a political statement, they are typically slow to pick up, new practices. They were the first to widely implement these Zoom things. Oh, wow. I had no idea. I'm sorry. Michelle just reminded me that there's no breakout rooms in Webex. Aren't you lucky that most of this circuit is moving on to Zoom and dedicated there too? Well, none? That surprises me. Okay, here's my prediction. There's going to be in the very near future. There's no way. The function of breakout rooms is so useful, not just for the law, but for education, for business meetings, that Webex is going to steal the idea back from Zoom in the very near future. It's going to be a reality for people in Webex, if it isn't one now, and apparently it is not. Now, 38 questions. I think that similar, breakout room process for witnesses to ensure witness exclusion from Ms. Chapman. Yeah, there will be when we get to that. It's easy to do, so I can say that. Judge Mitsuyama says breakout rooms will be available soon. See, I told you they can't afford to be left in the dirt on this. I mean, we did have, let me just say, I got a few minutes left. Yeah, we did have what was called a Webex training session that was really just an anti-Zoom screed and rant, because they didn't mention Zoom. They just kept saying, we're Webex and we've been around for 20 years and, and you can rely on us because we're not going to go dead on you because we're Webex. And we also have a few features. So clearly the corporate culture of Webex is one of great fear of Zoom. So I don't think there's anything that Zoom can do that Webex won't be able to shortly thereafter. Michelle just sent a chat to everybody letting you know that, let's see, the PDF has just been sent to everybody who logged in with an email. So you're welcome. Just a thought. Let's see, opening remarks in the gallery. Okay. Yeah. Doug, Deputy Attorney General Poo's pointed out that we can also just email. If anyone wants to share their email that can be told as well. If you want a copy, it can be emailed. So far, we're just letting people download it on their own, or else, because most of the time, if they need to see the complaint, it's because they've got a lawyer who can also download it. I've also found eCourt Kakua is actually not that hard to navigate from a layperson perspective. So there are options available. The short answer is, yeah, we may consider that as a possibility. Right now, we've got our hands full sending the emails, the disposition slips out to everybody. But that is one of the things that's allowing us to get through this all fairly quickly. Oh, Bloomberg reports Seattle scheduling virtual trials. Thank you, Mr. Sato. Trials, plural. All right, future's on its way. Okay, so I'm only at about 3 minutes left, and as far as I can tell, let's see, I think we've hit all the questions that have been posted. That being said, let me end this with something a little bit unusual, a sort of motivational speaking call to action. Because this is technology that's here. It's not going to be going away. We'll have live court, but this circuit is committed to keeping remote court appearances available because of what we've seen in terms of access to justice. people have mobile phones or telephones, and they're able to attend where they can't attend otherwise. We can send them into breakout rooms if they need an interpreter with their lawyer and their interpreter. So much of this process, even though it started as a result of something bad, has been good for us. And from our perspective, we believe for the litigants that we're going to remain committed to this. So I will ask all of you to commit to being proactive in seeing just what's out there. You'll give yourself an advantage in a world that's changing, admittedly, faster and more radically than any of us expected, and almost certainly more than any of us would have wanted. But the alternative would have been a dead stop. And we, the judiciary, consider that unacceptable. So let me end this with a big shout out to all the litigators, particularly the deputies, prosecutors, the deputy public defenders, and the members of the criminal private defense bar and civil bar who've already committed to remote litigation and gotten very good at it in the process. As with all litigation, preparation's everything. So as long as you know your environment, you know your audience, and know this, that the internet is full of motivational trainers and presenter trainers with tons of tips specific to webinars and remote communications, all of which apply very readily and easily to online litigation. That will give you the ability, for want of a better term, and I probably shouldn't say this as a judge, but to sell your case, to sell your point. And bear in mind, again, patience with the technology. At this point, I've dealt with, again, over 1,000 separate remote litigants. The failure rate has been surprisingly low. And at a certain point, it'll become just as ignorable as cell phone drop-offs. That said, we've hit the 10:15 mark, so we're out of time. I'd like to thank you all for participating. And again, big thank you to Michelle for making this possible as our host. And to Pat Mashimizu at the HSBA and all the members who've made this possible, and all of you for participating in this. And I hope taking away from this, the one most important takeaway, that this is doable and there's plenty of help online. That said, again, I'm Judge James Kawashima. This has been our webinar on online litigation, and I hope you find it helpful.